The windsock at the edge of the runway snapped hard to the east. 12,000 feet above the flat Kansas farmland, a Cessna 208 banked into its final pass, and a 79-year-old man stood in the open doorway with his hand on the frame, staring down at the green and brown patchwork below like he was reading a letter from an old friend. Behind him, 3 younger jumpers exchanged glances. One of them mouthed 2 words to the others. "No way." But the old man wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the orange X painted on the grass below, the target marker, the one spot on that entire field where precision meant something. His lips moved. No one heard what he said. Then he stepped out into nothing. But we need to go back to 6 hours earlier, back to the moment this whole thing started. Because what happened at Heartland Skydive Centre on that Saturday morning in late September is a story about respect, about assumptions, about why you should never ever look at a man's age and think you know what he's made of. Type honour in the comments if you believe respect isn't something you outgrow, and stay with me. Because what this man did at 12,000 feet silenced every single person on that airfield. His name was Earl Birch, 79 years old, 5'9", 152 pounds, most of it sinew and patience. He drove a 2004 Ford Ranger with 241,000 miles on it, and when he pulled into the gravel lot at Heartland Skydive Centre that morning, the truck coughed twice before it died. Earl sat there for a moment, both hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield at the low cinder block building with the painted parachute logo on the side. A banner stretched across the entrance read "Jump into Adventure. Tandem skydives, starting at $199. Earl's jaw worked slowly like he was chewing on a thought. Then he reached for the door handle and stepped out into the morning sun. The parking lot was already filling up. A group of 5 younger men, late 20s, early 30s, stood near a black-lifted pickup truck, laughing loud and slapping each other on the back. They wore matching t-shirts that said "Send It" in bold letters. One of them had a GoPro strapped to his chest. Another was filming the group with his phone, narrating their arrival like it was a documentary. Bachelor party. You could smell it from 50 yards away. Not booze, not yet. Just that particular brand of loud confidence that comes from being young and healthy and absolutely certain the world was built for you. Earl walked past them without a word. He wore a faded denim shirt buttoned to the second button, tucked into khaki pants that had been ironed with a crease sharp enough to cut paper. His boots were old but clean, brown leather worn smooth at the toes, on his left wrist a simple Timex watch, the kind they stopped making 20 years ago. His white hair was cut short, military short, and his face was lean and weathered, the skin pulled tight across cheekbones that could have been carved from mesquite wood. He moved with a strange economy, no wasted motion, every step placed like it mattered. The bachelor party boys didn't notice him. Why would they? The front desk at Heartland Skydive was a plywood counter with a computer monitor, a stack of liability waivers, and a jar of lollipops that said, "Take one. You earned it." Behind the counter sat a young woman named Shelby with a nose ring and a ponytail, who looked up and smiled the way people smile at someone's grandfather who wandered in looking for the hardware store. "Hi there. Welcome to Heartland Skydive. Are you here for someone? Picking up?" Earl placed both hands on the counter. His fingers were long, the knuckles swollen with age, but they were steady. "I'm here to jump." Shelby's smile held, but her eyes changed. Just slightly. That flicker people get when they're recalculating. "Oh, that's great. That's awesome. So we have a tandem package that's perfect for first-timers. You'd be strapped to one of our certified instructors the entire time. Super safe. Really fun. You don't have to do anything except enjoy the ride." "I don't want tandem," Earl said. His voice was quiet but clear, like a radio tuned to exactly the right frequency. "I want solo freefall." The silence that followed was brief but heavy. Shelby's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Solo? Like by yourself? That's generally what solo means." "Right. She glanced toward the back hallway. "Let me get Cody. He's our head instructor. He handles all the, advanced bookings." She disappeared behind a curtain that separated the front desk from the office area, and Earl stood there, patient, hands still on the counter, eyes scanning the framed photographs on the wall. Skydivers in formation, a team building a star pattern. A woman in free fall with her arms spread wide, mouth open in what was either joy or terror. Earl studied each one with the quiet attention of a man who'd seen these things from a different altitude, from a different era. Cody Briggs came through the curtain like he was walking onto a stage, 28 years old, 6'2", 210 pounds of CrossFit confidence packed into a Heartland Skydive polo shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to show forearms covered in tattoo ink. He had 2,000 jumps under his belt, a USPAC license, and the easy grin of a man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. He extended his hand. "Hey there, sir. I'm Cody. I hear you're interested in jumping with us today." Earl shook his hand once. Firm. Released. Solo freefall. Cody's grin didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. He pulled a chair around and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, the way young people do when they want you to know they're being sincere. "So listen, we love the enthusiasm, seriously, but solo freefall requires a USPAA license at minimum, which means you'd need to have completed at least 25 jumps, including freefall maneuvers, and you'd need a current medical clearance given your, He paused, searching for the diplomatic word. "Given the physical requirements." "I have my license," Earl said. "You have an A license?" "D license." Now Cody's grin did slip. A USPAD license required a minimum of 500 jumps. It was the highest skydiving license issued by the United States Parachute Association. Most recreational jumpers never got past B. Cody had his C. He leaned back slightly, just an inch, the way a man does when the ground shifts under him. "A D license," Cody repeated. "Is there an echo in here?" "Sir, when was the last time you actually jumped?" Earl's eyes narrowed. Not in anger, in calculation, like he was counting something. "Define jumped. Out of an airplane. 1997, civilian jump, Coolidge, Arizona." Cody exhaled through his nose. "Okay, so that's, what, almost 30 years ago? Sir, I respect the history, I really do, but the sport has changed a lot since then. Equipment's different. Procedures are different. I can't in good conscience put you out at 12,000 feet solo without a currency jump or a refresher course. Liability alone would. I brought my own rig." That stopped Cody mid-sentence. His mouth hung open for a half second, which for a man like Cody was an eternity. "You brought your own rig?" "It's in the truck. Javelin container. Main canopy is a Sabre 2170. Reserve is a PD Optimum 160. Both packed within the last 60 days. I have the packing data cards if you want to see them." Cody blinked. Behind him, Shelby had reappeared and was watching from the curtain with wide eyes. I'll need to see those cards. And your license. And a medical." Earl reached into his back pocket and produced a folded envelope. Inside was his USPAD license card, a medical clearance signed by a physician in Wichita dated 3 weeks prior, and 2 packing data cards from a certified rigger in Hutchinson, Kansas. He laid each document on the counter the way a poker player lays down a hand. Quietly, without drama, but with the absolute certainty of a man who knows what he's holding. Cody picked up the license card and turned it over. The photo was older, maybe 10 years, but it was clearly the same man. Same lean face, same sharp eyes. The jump number listed on the card was 847. 847 jumps. Cody's own log stood at just over 2,000, but it had taken him 6 years of jumping nearly every weekend. The math on Earl's number was different. Heavier. Because D licenses weren't even required until the 1970s, and a man Earl's age with that number had started jumping when parachutes were round, when reserves were belly mounted, and when free-fall technique was something you learned by surviving it. But what Cody noticed most, what made his throat tighten just slightly, was the line on the license that read initial rating date. It said 1966. 1966. Earl Birch had been jumping out of airplanes since Lyndon Johnson was president. Cody set the card down slowly. "Okay, papers look good, but I still need to talk to you about the jump plan, current conditions, wind speed, landing pattern, altitude protocols, and I want to see your gear before I clear you." "I'd expect nothing less," Earl said. And for the first time something like approval flickered across his face. Barely. Like a match struck and blown out. He'd been testing Cody, and Cody had just barely passed. They walked outside together, and that's when things got complicated. Because the bachelor party was now gathered near the staging area, a concrete slab with benches and a wind indicator, and they were in the middle of suiting up for their tandem jumps. When they saw Earl walking toward the equipment shed with Cody, one of them nudged the others. "Yo, is that dude jumping?" The one with the GoPro chest mount, a thick-necked kid named Derek, laughed loud enough for the whole airfield to hear. "Bro, no way. They'd need to strap a defibrillator to the chute." The others laughed. Not all of them. One of them, a quieter guy in the back named Ryan, didn't laugh. He just watched. But the rest of them thought it was the funniest thing they'd heard all morning. Earl didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't even look their direction. He just kept walking, and if you were watching carefully, which most people weren't, you'd have noticed something about the way he walked past that group. His shoulders didn't tighten, his pace didn't change, his breathing stayed even. It was the walk of a man who had been laughed at by people far more dangerous than five guys in matching t-shirts. A man who had learned, a long time ago, that the people who laugh loudest are usually the ones who know the least. Cody popped the tailgate on Earl's Ranger, and there it was. A Javelin Odyssey container, charcoal grey with black trim, laid out on a clean wool blanket. Beside it, a full-face helmet, a Viso 2 digital altimeter, and a pair of worn leather gloves that looked like they'd seen more sky than most birds. Cody unzipped the container and inspected the closing loops. The reserve pin, the AAD unit, a Cypress 2, current. Everything was in order. More than in order, it was meticulous. The kind of gear maintenance that spoke of ritual, of discipline, of a man for whom preparation wasn't a checklist but a creed. "Who's your rigger?" Cody asked, not looking up. "Frank Delaney, out of Hutchinson." Cody knew the name. Everyone in Kansas skydiving knew Frank Delaney. The man had been packing reserves since before Cody was born. Former Army rigger, 82nd Airborne. If Frank packed your reserve, you slept well at night. "All right," Cody said, and his voice had changed. The patronizing edge was gone. In its place was something more careful, more professional. "You're on the next load. We go up in 45 minutes. Altitude 12.5. Winds are 8 knots from the southeast, gusting to 12. Landing pattern is left hand, and the target is the orange X on the main field. Hop and Pops land north. I'll be jump master on this load." "Understood," Earl said, and he began to dress. What happened over the next 45 minutes was quiet and unhurried, but if you knew what you were looking at, it was remarkable. Earl assembled his rig with the precision of a watchmaker. Every buckle, every snap, every adjustment was made by touch, by memory, by the kind of muscle knowledge that lives in your hands long after your mind has stopped thinking about it. He performed his own gear check, running his fingers along every line, every connection point, muttering to himself in a sequence that sounded almost like a prayer. Main pin, reserve pin, cutaway handle, reserve handle, AAD on, altimeter set, helmet secure, goggles clear. The bachelor party watched from the staging area, now strapped into their tandem harnesses like tourists on a roller coaster, which, to be fair, was essentially what they were. Their instructors, seasoned jumpers named Mike and Tanya, and a quiet man called Dutch, stood behind them running through the standard briefing. Arch your back, spread your arms, don't touch anything. Your instructor does all the work, simple stuff, safe stuff, tourist stuff. Earl was doing something different. He was standing alone near the windsock, eyes closed, face tilted slightly upward, and his right hand was making small, slow movements at his side. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd think he was conducting an invisible orchestra. But Cody knew. He was rehearsing his exit, his body position, his turn sequences, his pull altitude. In his mind, Earl was already at 12,000 feet, already falling, already flying. He was running the jump in his head the way he'd done it hundreds of times before, the way he'd been taught to do it in a place far less forgiving than a civilian drop zone in Kansas. And that's when Cody noticed something else. On the inside of Earl's left forearm, visible now that he'd rolled his sleeves to don the rig, there was a tattoo. Faded to near invisibility by decades of sun and time, but still legible. A pair of jump wings. Not civilian wings. Not the gold wings of a sports skydiver. These were military airborne wings, and beneath them, barely readable, were 3 words and a number. The 3 words were "Airborne all the way." And the number was 173. Cody's stomach dropped. 173rd Airborne Brigade, the Sky Soldiers, Vietnam. He didn't say anything, not yet, but his hands had stopped moving, and he stood there by the ranger's tailgate, staring at the old man by the windsock, as if he were seeing him for the first time, because in a way he was. The Cessna came down at 10:15, refueled and taxied back to the loading area. The pilot, a weathered crop duster named Cal, who'd been flying jump planes for 30 years, stepped out and looked at the manifest. His eyes lingered on the last name on the list. "Birch," Cal said, looking at Cody. "Solo?" "Solo," Cody confirmed. Cal looked over at Earl, who was now walking toward the aircraft with his rig on his back and his helmet in his hand. And something happened to Cal's face. It softened. Not pity. Something else. Something like remembrance. Cal had been in the army himself once upon a time. Fort Bragg. He'd never gone airborne, but he knew men who had, and he knew what they looked like when they walked toward an aircraft. Earl Birch looked exactly like that. "Let's give him a clean ride," Cal said quietly. Cody nodded. They loaded up. The bachelor party went first, crammed into the bench seats with their tandem instructors, helmets on, GoPros rolling, hooting and hollering like fraternity brothers at a football game. Derek was filming himself, giving a thumbs up to the camera and shouting, "Let's go!" Earl climbed in last. He sat near the door, as far from the group as the fuselage allowed. He buckled in, set his helmet on his knee, and folded his hands. His eyes were open, but he wasn't looking at anything inside the aircraft. He was looking at the door, at the sky beyond it, at something only he could see. The Cessna climbed 5,000 feet, 7,000, 9,000. The bachelor party's volume decreased with every 1,000 feet of altitude, the way bravado does when gravity starts to become a real conversation instead of an abstract idea. At 10,000 feet, Derek had stopped filming. At 11,000, Ryan, the quiet one, was gripping his harness strap so hard his knuckles were white. The noise of the engine and the wind through the fuselage made conversation impossible, which was a mercy for everyone. At 11,500 feet, the tandem pairs began their exit sequence. Mike went first with his student, then Tanya, then Dutch with Derek, who had to be physically guided to the door because his legs had apparently stopped receiving signals from his brain. One by one, they tumbled out into the Kansas sky, their tandem instructors doing all the work, the students just along for the ride, ragdolls strapped to professionals. Then it was Earl's turn. Cody moved to the door and slid it open. The wind hit them like a living thing. 12,000 feet above the earth, the air is cold and fast and indifferent to everything you think you know about yourself. It strips away pretense the way sandpaper strips paint. What's underneath is all that matters. Earl stood. The movement was slow but deliberate. He placed his helmet on his head and fastened the chin strap. He pulled his goggles down. He checked his altimeter. He checked his handles. Main, reserve, cutaway. Each one touched, confirmed, and released. Then he walked to the door. And here is where something changed. Something that everyone on that aircraft felt but no one could have explained. Because the man who walked to that door was not the same quiet old man who'd shuffled into the front office that morning. The stoop was gone. The deference was gone. The apologetic posture of a 79-year-old navigating a young person's world had evaporated like morning frost. What stood in the door of that Cessna was something else entirely. Something forged in jump school at Fort Benning in 1965, tempered in the jungles of Vietnam and never, not once in 58 years, forgotten. Earl placed his left foot on the edge of the door frame. His right hand gripped the overhead rail. He leaned out into the wind and looked down. 12,000 feet below, the Orangeac sat in the centre of the grass field like a period at the end of a sentence. The wind was steady, 8 knots southeast. He did the math in his head the way he'd done it over Dak To, over the Central Highlands, over drop zones with names that never made it into the history books, but were burned into the memories of every man who survived them. He looked back at Cody, just once, and in that look, Cody saw something he would never forget. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't defiance, it was calm. The absolute bone-deep calm of a man who had done this before, not for fun, not for a bachelor party, not for a YouTube video, but because other men's lives depended on it. Because the mission demanded it. Because the sky had called him and he had answered every single time without hesitation, without complaint, and without fear. "Blue skies," Cody said. It was the traditional skydiver's farewell. Earl nodded. Then he stepped out of the airplane. His exit was textbook. Not modern textbook, not the arched back belly-to-earth position they teach in AFF courses now. It was older, tighter, A compact body position with the chin tucked, the arms in close, the legs together, a position designed not for recreation but for combat, for exiting at low altitude with heavy equipment, for getting out of the aircraft and getting stable as fast as humanly possible, because the tree line was coming up, and the tracers were coming up, and the only thing between you and the ground was silk and nerve. But then he opened up. Smoothly, like a flower blooming in fast forward, Earl spread his arms and legs into a stable arch, and he flew. Not fell. Flew. There is a difference, and skydivers know it. Falling is what gravity does to you. Flying is what you do to gravity. And Earl Birch was flying. Cody watched from the door of the Cessna, and his mouth was open. Not because it was impossible, not because it was surprising, but because it was beautiful. The old man was falling at 120 miles an hour, perfectly stable, making small corrections with his hands, adjusting his heading with slight movements of his shoulders, tracking toward the target with the focused precision of a rifle scope. There was no wobble, no panic, no wasted movement, just pure, practiced, absolute control. Below, on the ground, the scene was very different. The tandem pairs had landed, or rather, their instructors had landed them, scattered across the field in the approximate vicinity of the target area. Derek was on his back in the grass 200 yards south of the X, helmet askew, trying to high-five his instructor, who was busy gathering the canopy. Ryan had landed on the gravel access road and was sitting very still with both hands flat on the ground, as if confirming that the Earth was real. Mike's student was in the parking lot. Tanya's was in a soybean field adjacent to the drop zone. Not one of them had landed within 100 yards of the orange X. Shelby stood near the staging area with a radio watching the sky. She'd been tracking Earl since the Cessna had passed overhead, and now she could see the canopy. It had deployed at 4,000 feet. Clean opening, square canopy, full inflation, no line twists, no malfunctions. She watched him enter the landing pattern, a long downwind leg, a base turn, a final approach, and she realized she was holding her breath. Because he was coming in on the X, not near the X, not in the general direction of the X, on it. His approach was a descending spiral that tightened with each revolution, bleeding altitude with surgical precision, the canopy carving the air like a blade through water. She'd seen good landings before. She'd seen instructors with 5,000 jumps nail the target. But she'd never seen anything like this. The wind was gusting. The canopy was a sport model that required aggressive input to manage, and this 79-year-old man was flying it like he was born in the harness. 200 feet. He was on final approach now, heading into the wind, his toggles half depressed, his body upright, his legs together, his eyes locked on the orange X below him. 100 feet, 50, 20. At 10 feet he flared. Both toggles pulled smoothly to his hips. The canopy surged forward and then stopped. The forward speed bled away into lift, and Earl Birch touched down on the orange X with both feet together, standing upright like he was stepping off a curb, on the X, dead center, standing. The canopy settled behind him in a neat pile, and Earl stood there for a moment with his hands at his sides, looking up at the sky where he'd been, just breathing. His face was calm, the same face he'd had at the front desk, the same face he'd had at the door of the Cessna, the same face he'd probably had in the door of a C-130 over Vietnam in 1967, when the green light came on, and the jump master screamed, "Go!" And 18-year-old Earl Birch stepped into the night sky over a war zone because that was what the mission required, and that was what he'd been trained to do. Shelby was the first one to react. She keyed the radio and said, "Target, dead center, standing landing." Her voice cracked on the last word. She didn't know why. She just knew that she'd seen something she wasn't going to forget. On the field, the bachelor party guys were walking back toward the staging area, and they'd seen it too. Derek had stopped talking, which, based on the evidence of the morning, might have been a first. Ryan was standing still, watching the old man gather his canopy with the methodical precision of a man who'd done it 1,000 times, which of course he had. Cody was the last one down. He jumped after Earl, a solo of his own, and landed a respectable 30 yards from the target. Respectable, but 30 yards. He walked toward Earl, pulling his helmet off, and something in his chest was doing things he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't embarrassment, although there was some of that. It wasn't awe, although there was some of that too. It was something older and deeper, The feeling a student gets when he realizes the teacher was in the room the entire time and he never noticed. Earl was stuffing his canopy into the deployment bag with practiced hands, his movements unhurried, his breathing even. He didn't look up when Cody approached. He just kept packing. "Mr. Birch," Cody said. "Earl." "Earl," Cody paused. He was not a man who struggled for words, but he was struggling now. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." Earl glanced up, waited. "The 173rd. You were with the 173rd Airborne." It wasn't a question. Earl's hands stopped moving. He looked at Cody with those steady, water-blue eyes, and for a moment the mask slipped. Just for a moment. Behind the calm, behind the patience, behind the quiet dignity that had carried him through this entire morning, without a single raised word or defensive gesture, there was something vast, something heavy, something that smelled like jungle and cordite and helicopter fuel and the particular silence that follows a firefight when you're counting heads and praying the number matches. 1966 to 1969, Earl said. 3 tours. 3 tours, Cody repeated. D Company, 1st Battalion, 503rd Infantry. We jumped into DAC 2 in November 67. Operation Hump before that, Cedar Falls. He said the names the way a man recites the stations of a cross, with weight, with reverence, with the understanding that the words themselves are insufficient containers for what they represent. Cody sat down on the grass. He didn't decide to sit, his legs just did it. Dacto, that was Hill 875. That was Hill 875, Earl confirmed. His voice was very quiet now. Hill 875, November 1967. The 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry, 173rd Airborne Brigade, walked into an NVA ambush on a jungle hillside near Dak To, in the central highlands of Vietnam. For 4 days they fought up that hill under withering fire, losing nearly half their men. An errant bomb from a friendly aircraft struck their own position, killing and wounding dozens more. When they finally took the summit, they found the enemy had already withdrawn. It remains one of the bloodiest engagements of the Vietnam War, and the men who fought there carry it with them the way the earth carries stone. I wasn't on 875, Earl said, as if reading Cody's mind. I was with 1st Battalion. We were north of there, but we heard it, all of it, and we went in after. He paused. His hands resumed their work on the canopy, but slower now. Lost 11 men in my platoon between September and January, 11 out of 32. Good men. Boys, most of them. I was 20 years old, and I was one of the old guys. Cody said nothing. There was nothing to say. Or rather, there was everything to say, but none of it would be enough, so silence was the only honest response. I made 47 jumps in the army, Earl continued. 12 of them were combat or combat exercise jumps. The rest were training. After I came home, I kept jumping. Civilian. It was the only thing that still made sense. The only place where my body remembered what it was supposed to do instead of what it had done. He looked at Cody. I stopped in 97 because my wife asked me to. She'd been patient for 30 years. I figured she'd earned it. She passed last March. That sentence hung in the air between them like a held breath. She passed last March. 8 words that contained an entire universe of loss and love, and the specific kind of loneliness that comes after 50-some years of sharing a bed with someone, and then waking up to find the other side cold. I promised myself I'd make one more jump, Earl said. For her. She always said I was most alive in the air. She was probably right. Helen was right about most things. Cody's eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them. He just let them be wet, because some things earn your tears whether you give them permission or not. What happened next spread through the drop zone the way fire moves through dry grass. Cal heard first, from Cody, and the old pilot stood by his Cessna and took his cap off and held it over his heart, which was a gesture he'd never made for anyone in 30 years of flying. Shelby heard next, and she went into the office bathroom and cried for 5 minutes, which she would later blame on allergies with zero conviction. Mike and Tanya and Dutch heard, and each of them found a reason to walk past Earl and shake his hand or clap him on the shoulder without saying too much, because jumpers understand that some things are communicated better through touch than through language. And the bachelor party heard, Derek heard, Ryan heard, and something extraordinary happened. Derek, the loudest of them, the one who'd cracked the defibrillator joke, the one who'd spent the morning performing for his own camera, walked over to where Earl was sitting on the tailgate of his truck. Canopy packed, helmet off, drinking water from a metal thermos. Derek stood there for a moment, and the bravado was gone, stripped away by 12,000 feet of altitude and the terrible, humbling math of comparing your own small courage against the real thing. "Sir," Derek said. He didn't have anything to follow it with, just that one word. But the way he said it meant everything. Earl looked at him, studied his face, saw the flush of shame and the beginning of something better underneath it. And Earl, because he was the kind of man he was, because 58 years of jumping and 3 tours in Vietnam and 47 years of marriage had taught him that grace is always more powerful than vindication, simply nodded. "You've got a strong exit," he said. "Work on your arch. Keep your chin up, literally. Chin up, hips forward. You'll be fine." Derek blinked. Then he laughed, a real laugh this time, surprised and grateful. "Thank you, sir." "Don't call me sir. I work for a living." It's an old military joke. Enlisted men say it to distinguish themselves from officers who are addressed as sir. But the way Earl said it wasn't a joke. It was an identity. It was 50 years of service and sacrifice compressed into 6 words. Ryan, the quiet one from the bachelor party, came over last. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at Earl's rig laid out on the blanket in the truck bed, the javelin container, the Sabre 2 canopy, the worn leather gloves, the Timex watch. Then he said, very quietly, "My grandfather was 82nd Normandy." Earl looked at him. "Normandy?" "D-Day +4. He was a replacement. He never talked about it." "They usually don't. He died 3 years ago. He had a jump log. I found it in his things after. He'd logged 421 jumps. I didn't even know he'd jumped. He never told me." Earl was very still. "What was his name?" "Patrick Ryan, Staff Sergeant." "I didn't know him," Earl said, "but I know his kind. And I promise you, son, everything he didn't tell you, he told the sky." Ryan's chin trembled. He nodded once, hard, and walked away. And that was enough. That was more than enough. Because some conversations happen in the spaces between words, and the 2 men who'd had that conversation understood it perfectly. Cody found Earl a half-hour later standing by his truck, rig stowed, ready to leave. The sun was high and the wind had died down, and the Kansas sky was the kind of blue that makes you believe the world might be fundamentally good after all. "Earl," Cody said, "I owe you an apology." "You don't." "I do. I looked at you this morning and I saw a 79-year-old man. I didn't see a jumper. I didn't see a soldier. I saw someone I needed to protect from himself. That was wrong." Earl considered this. He opened his truck door and set his thermos on the seat. Then he turned back to Cody and said something that Cody would carry for the rest of his career. "You did your job, son. You verified my credentials. You checked my gear. You confirmed the conditions. That's what a good jumpmaster does. Don't apologize for being cautious. Apologize if you're ever careless." He got in the truck, turned the key. The engine coughed twice, then caught. He put it in gear and looked at Cody through the open window. "One thing," Earl said. "Yeah?" "The landing pattern. Your students are coming in too hot on the base turn. They're overshooting the target by 100 yards because they're not accounting for the thermal lift off that soybean field to the south. Tell them to extend their downwind leg by 3 seconds. They'll hit the X." Cody stared at him. Then he laughed. Not at Earl. With the sheer absurdity of a 79-year-old man casually fixing his landing pattern instruction on the way out the door. "I'll do that. Thank you." Earl nodded. Then he drove away. The Ford Ranger coughed through the gravel lot and turned onto the county road and disappeared into the Kansas flatland. And Cody stood there watching it go, thinking about wind patterns and thermal lift and the soybean field and the orange X, and the look on Earl's face when he'd stood in the door of that Cessna, and he realized something that would take him years to fully understand. He'd spent 6 years building a career in the sky, 2,000 jumps, records, ratings, Instagram followers. And on that Saturday morning, a 79-year-old man with a faded tattoo and a dead wife and an old Ford Ranger had stepped out of an airplane and shown him what it actually looked like when someone who'd earned the sky came back to claim it. The next Saturday, Cody moved the windsock. He extended the recommended downwind leg by 3 seconds, and for the first time in the history of Heartland Skydive Center, 2 students out of 5 landed on the X. He didn't tell them why. He just smiled and said, "Work on your arch. Keep your chin up. A uniform may fade, the wings may yellow on your arm, but what the sky teaches you, it teaches you forever. And some men don't need a canopy to fly. They've been carrying their own wings all along, hidden, quiet, ready, waiting for one more reason to step out into the blue. If this story reminded you that age is just a number but experience is everything, you're going to want to hear what happened when a homeless veteran walked into a VFW hall and sat down at the bar. What the bartender said to him almost started a fight. What happened when the commander walked in ended it permanently. Subscribe for more stories of the men and women who gave everything and ask for nothing. Comment airborne if you believe the sky belongs to those who've earned it. And hit that like button if you think 79 years old is just another way of saying been jumping since before you were born. Blue skies, Earl. Blue skies.